You already know that root beer isn't a beer, but did you know that it was a tea? Let's see what this story holds on this episode of Antique Bottle Stories. Charles Elmer Hires was born in 1851 in New Jersey. His family were devout Quakers. His mom was actually descended from Martha Washington. He left school at age 12 to work at a drugstore, and like many other soda manufacturers around this time, he started out as a pharmacist in Philadelphia. So from age 12 to age 16, he apprenticed under a pharmacist, and 4 years was enough time for him to be qualified as a pharmacist. He said he occasionally attended some lectures at the college, but that was all the formal training that he had. He says that in 1872 there was an exam that all druggists needed to take in order to continue practicing, and he did pass that. So in those days, you had to save up $400 to be able to start your own business. So that's what he did. And while he was running his drugstore, he noticed some construction next door. Someone was digging out a cellar. He noticed an interesting clump of dirt, and as he picked it up, he noticed that it was clay, potter's clay. So a little light bulb went off, and he asked the guys if he could have this clay. And they were happy to give it to him because they wouldn't have to haul it across town. So Hires says that he filled up his entire basement to the ceiling with this clay. He formed them into little discs and he dried them in the sun, and then he sold this clay all over town, and he even used the clay in New Jersey and New York for trade. So he ended up using this free clay to stock his drugstore. So that was a big jumpstart for him. So he married Clara in 1875 when he was 24. And for their honeymoon, they took a trip to New Jersey and they stopped into an inn. While he was there, the innkeeper's wife brought them an herbal tea. The woman told them that it was an old family recipe and it contained 16 different roots and berries, including juniper, wintergreen, sarsaparilla, and hops. The newlywed couple loved this drink so much that Charles asked her for the recipe. And when he got back home, he and 2 college professors recreated the tea. And then they created a concentrate of the tea, which you would then add water, sugar, and yeast to. Apparently they got it remarkably close to her original drink. So Hires decided to try selling this new drink to the Pennsylvania coal miners as an alternative to alcohol. He called it Hires Herb Tea. To be honest, I'm a little sad that that innkeeper's family recipe got no credit for this. Well, a friend of his, Reverend Dr. Russell Conwell, said the miners would never drink it if it was called a tea, so let's call it a beer, a root beer. I never knew that's how root beer got its name. So in 1876, Hires root beer was introduced at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. He gave out free samples, and he got an overwhelming positive response. He quickly realized that he could market this outside of the coal miner market. He started marketing in the newspapers. The first ad that I find is in 1877. He was selling the concentrate for 25 cents that would make 5 gallons. He then started advertising the drink as a healing tonic, as a healthy alternative to alcohol. Here's 1878. He promotes it as a refreshing beverage during the summer months. I especially love the way it says, the healthiest and pleasantest beverage for summer use. Through the 1880s, while companies like Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper were in their infant stages, Hires root beer was making its way on the scene. Here's 1882. Hires root beer strengthens feeble women and makes puny children strong. It was promoted as a temperance movement alternative. This one also says it strengthens and purifies the blood. This 1883 directory shows Charles is listed with vanilla beans. This 1889 ad shows the package it comes in, although it doesn't show what the bottle looks like, but it was a 3-ounce bottle that looks similar to this one. Here's a 1890 coupon in the paper, good for 1 glass of root beer. Here's a 1892 poem. It says, "When old soul makes things sizzle, drink Hires root beer. When dull care makes life a fizzle, drink Hires root beer. When you feel a little dry, when you're cross and you don't know why, when with thirst children cry, there's a sweet relief to try. Drink Hires root beer. That was a tongue twister. This 1892 ad is really nice, and it mentions that a carload contains 160,000 to 180,000 gallons of concentrated root beer. They must have been running into a bunch of copycats because they printed this ad saying, "Look out for this label to avoid counterfeits." During the 1880s and 90s, Hires also had a cough cure. It seems to have disappeared right around 1900 though. By 1895, the company was bottling ready-made drinks, as well as the concentrate, all over the country. This newspaper article gives a bunch of statistics, like Charles Hires' first year, he sold only 864 bottles of root beer. And the beverage has been on the market now for 17 years, and they had sold over 3 million packages last year. This 1896 article shows the company was recapitalized at $500,000. Meanwhile, in 1896, Hires opened a plant to condense milk. He ended up organizing 6 milk condensing companies, which operated 21 milk plants in the United States and Canada. I put this one in because it shows a picture of the bottle. I guess they were using Crown Tops back in 1898. Also, in 1898, they were still promoting it as a refreshing beverage for hot summer months. In the 1900 directory, Charles, of course, is still president. The address of the factory is Fairmount and Chestnut Street, which I don't think that intersection exists anymore, and I couldn't find anything on the fate of the factory, but it doesn't seem to be standing anymore. And here's what some bottles would have looked like around 1903. And here's something interesting that I didn't even see until I was pretty much done with all the research on this one. At some point during the early 1900s, Hires sold pure water in bottles, and it was called Pure Rock. He dabbled in a little bit of everything, didn't he? In 1905, this directory, we actually see the milk company listed, the same with 1910. Now here's the 1910 census. Charles is 58 now. Here's his household. His wife Clara, 2 daughters and 3 sons, Edgar, Harrison, and Charles Jr. There's 2 servants and a coachman. Fancy. His wife Clara dies later this year, after 35 years of being married. But in 1911, he gets remarried to Emma. Here in 1917, this place in South Dakota is serving root beer from a keg, and it's serving it in steins. Here in 1921, we see Charles is still the president, J. Edgar is vice president, Charles Jr. is the treasurer, and Harrison is the secretary. Here's some photos of his boys. So Charles is about 70 now, so he's getting his boys ready to take over the company. Also notice J. Edgar is listed as industrial engineer, president of Automatic Machinery and Equipment Company, and also the vice president of the root beer company. The milk company here was sold to Nestle for over $1 million in the early 20s. Apparently in 1923, Charles Jr. takes over as president. Charles Sr. still stays involved, but he retires and he goes fishing more. Charles enjoyed deep sea fishing, and when he was 85, he was out on a fishing trip and he suffered a stroke. He ended up dying in 1937. At the time of his death, his root beer was the top-selling root beer in the world. In 1960, Hires was acquired by the Consolidated Food Corporation. Charles Jr. is around 70 at this time, and he retires, and the Hires family is no longer running the company at that point. In 1989, Cadbury Schweppes acquired it. So my bottle is one of those 3-ounce bottles that you would add water to, and it would make 5 gallons of root beer. It's a screw top. It still has some product in it, and I was able to get it open, and it does still smell like root beer. It's an interesting version of root beer, and I don't know if that's because it's made with different ingredients than what I'm used to, or if it's just because it's super old and its composition has changed. But it's still pleasant to sniff. And I'm not sure if my bottle could be anywhere from the 30s, 40s, or even the 50s. Here are some older examples that I found online. And apparently Hires had some early mugs and bottles made of stoneware, and they were made by Sherwin Pottery and White Utica Pottery. And that's it for today. And you know me, I have some super cheesy commercials for you, so I'll leave you with those, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
It's time for Hires, that real old-time root beer.
Since 1876, for pleasure and thirst.
You taste the difference. The flavor of actual roots, bark, and herbs.
Hires to you, all your taste desires, for purity and better flavor. Stop and have a Hires. Yes, youngsters, oldsters, all agree, here's a drink for all the family. From the bottle, fountain, and the keg, too, it's real old-time Hires root beer for pleasure and thirst. Hires to you. Patronize the refreshment stand here for popcorn, frankfurters, candy, ice cream.
And Hires root beer.
Here comes Hires Root Beer, still caffeine-free with luscious taste and a foamy trace.
Hires great taste is a luscious, creamy, great taste. Supreme! And that's just as plain as the foam on your face. Our true root beer taste is always leaving its trace. Hires great taste is a luscious, creamy, great taste. And that's just as plain
as the foam on his face. Give me some.
Hold your tongue.